Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It is a short business week around here as the Ravens take on the Cleveland Browns this week. We got World Series action. Luke and I are talking all of these things out at the AM 1570 as well as at Baltimore Positive. Big crab cake tour set this Friday for Mamas on the Half Shell in Owings Mills up at Foundry Row. The old guys used to call that Painter's Mill or the Sweetheart Cup Company, where my stepbrother worked many years ago. We're going to be giving away the Ravens scratch-offs from the Maryland Lottery. We're also going to have our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, as well as Jiffy Lube, putting us out on the road for the 26th anniversary we have here of our Maryland Oyster Tour on a day-by-day basis. We're going to be featuring Ray Bachman a little later on in the week, and Ray is battling cancer. If you're an old-school WNST listener, you want to help Ray out, he has a GoFundMe. You can also help him out with a little love, send him an email or a note over his email. His old email still works, ray@WNST.net, so you can still find him there. Luke Jones is here. We have a short business week after what was a real bludgeoning of the defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, we sit here all day and talk about Lamar, the offense, the offense, the offense. I still feel like if they don't win the Super Bowl, the defense is going to be a big, big part of that. And it's something that we're not going to talk about when we're playing Jameis Winston this week or whatever. But Baker Mayfield, if they had added another quarter to the game on Sunday night, he was moving the ball, and they weren't afraid of moving the ball until Godwin got hurt at the end of the game. And that was a factor of them not giving up. But there is something about this defense that if you're an offensive coordinator in the other room preparing, you feel like there's some vulnerability here, especially if Marlon Humphrey's not going to get back out on the field this week.
Yeah, and obviously, if there's I don't want to say one bad spot because obviously the defense didn't play very well at the beginning of the game, certainly didn't play well at the end of the game. But the injury to Marlon Humphrey and John Harbaugh was kind of non-committal about it. I know Marlon Humphrey did his Instagram live post-game plane thing, so he can't be in that bad a shape. John Harbaugh said he was walking around. He was in good spirits after the game. So, I don't get the sense that this is any concern like an ACL or anything crazy like that. But when you're talking about someone who leaves the game in the second quarter and then is ruled out early in the second half, that's generally a sign that it's not nothing either. So, we'll see how this week looks. To your point, I mean, this is a Cleveland Browns team that they're going to face that who knows who's going to be a quarterback. They've traded away Amari Cooper. I mean, I, I, the Ravens better not lose to the Browns. I mean that, and I say that just out of a compliment to the Ravens. And as
Well, I'll be
much as
talking to Cleveland people all week about whether they're trading Myles
sure,
Garrett or not. Given cap numbers and all the things that go on that bake all this together, we traded for Roquan Smith a couple years ago. So anything's possible, I guess, when you're throwing the towel in and you're going to have to redo your franchise, which is pretty much where they are. They're going to have to redo their franchise in Cleveland.
yeah, but I mean, clearly the focus for the Ravens is how to get this defense playing at a more consistent level. I mean, they came out uh, opening drive. Tampa Bay moves right down the field, scores a touchdown. Second drive, field goal. So at least the defense was able to tighten up inside the red zone on that front. And then, as we talked about in our previous segment, the real turning point was Tampa Bay's third drive, where Mike Evans drops a touchdown, hurts his hamstring in the process. And you could kind of tell, even on his first touchdown catch, that he wasn't right. That was an issue for him throughout the week. So can't say I was shocked that the hamstring issue popped up during the game. But between that drop and then Mayfield throwing the pick to finish that drive, even though he had Bucky Irving open for a touchdown at the beginning of that play, and he didn't see him, and then he tries to force one into the corner, and Marlon Humphrey gets that pick. I mean, it completely changed the game. The game really flipped from that point in time. But you look at this defense, and the second and third quarter, they played pretty well. I mean, you look at how the drives just went for Tampa Bay. First two drives, touchdown, field goal. Then after that, interception, interception. End of half. Don't really count that. That was just a kneel down. But then they come out in the second half. Tampa moves the ball, but they hold them to a long field goal try, 55-yarder, no good. And then punt, punt. I mean, I get it. The fourth quarter, I'd like to see them not give up three touchdowns, but we also know that game was basically over, right? And I mean, I hear what you're saying if the game goes another quarter, but on the flip side of that, if the game goes another quarter, well, they've got to stop Lamar Jackson and this Ravens offense multiple times, and they weren't able to do that. So yeah, I'd love to see this defense find more consistency. I think there's still the makings of a solid defense in there somewhere. I don't think this secondary is completely devoid of talent or a completely lost cause by any stretch of the imagination, but at some point in time, you got to start doing it. And yeah, they all year long they have not been able to play a complete 60 minutes other than the Buffalo game, right? So 1 out of 7. The other 6, they've had at least a bad quarter or two where it's really impacted their numbers, the statistics, the flow of the game, whatever. So they've got to figure that out. They know that. I mean, even hearing and reading some of Kyle Hamilton's post game comments, he was asked about Humphrey coming away with those 2 picks and how important they were. He said, well, heck, we could have had 5. If you go look, we dropped a couple others, and we've talked about that. So, but to be positive, to look for a positive here, I said this to you going into Monday night's game. If this defense can at least find a way to be more dynamic, be a little more variant in the way of forcing a couple more turnovers along the way, getting an extra possession for your offense, taking away a possession that is so incredibly valuable for the opposition when you're trying to keep up with this Ravens offense. If they can do a little more of that, I can live with this not being your typical top 10 or top 5 kind of Ravens defense. If they can do more of that, and they were able to do that on Monday night.
Well, the
Now, the
Humphrey
guy who
pick
did
in the
it,
back of the end zone, like that really
that's a big play.
changed things from a was going to be 7, turns out to be nothing, should have at least been 3. And
Sure.
it was a really sloppy interception. I mean, great play by Humphrey. We pointed that out. I mean, he peeled back into the corner of the end zone. Mayfield didn't see him, but they were on their heels again. To make a big play in that circumstance really changed the game.
Yeah. I mean, from that point on, it was all Ravens until so late in the game where you knew, practically speaking, let's face it, even when they recovered the onside kick, were you worried at any? I still wasn't worried. It was looking at the defense and saying, "Oh, you need to finish better than this." But at no point in that fourth quarter did I think that this game was in jeopardy. So yeah, that completely turned the game. I mean, it really did. So if you can at least do more of that as a defense, as a pass defense, become a little more dynamic in that way, be a little more high variant, where you can force a few more takeaways, get a couple more sacks in some key spots, and make things a little bit better on that front, even if the passing yardage and the total yardage and the big plays are still too many, and you're still chasing that, and they still are. I mean, you could tell reading some of the comments and hearing some of the post-game comments. I mean, that was a defense that was happy to win, but they knew that it was way more the offense doing what they did that resulted in that outcome. And these guys, that's a prideful group. I mean, this is a group that was the best defense in football last year in terms of scoring defense, turnovers, and sacks. I mean, that triple crown defense that they had last year, we know it's diminished in terms of some of the coaching and Jadeveon Clowney and Geno Stone and some other depth pieces here and there. But by and large, this is still a really talented group. And that's why I'm not giving up hope on that group, but you got to figure this out. I mean, you do, because you don't want to be in a position on a day where, let's face it, at some point in time, and when I say this, it doesn't mean they're going to stink, but at some point in time between now and whenever the season ends, hopefully for the Ravens' sake in New Orleans in February, but they're going to have a couple games where the offense isn't clicking to this degree, to this magnitude. And when that happens, you're going to need your defense to pick it up some. And that's where you look at this thing and say, okay, good second quarter, good third quarter, fourth quarter stunk and was sloppy, and had Ed Reed basically saying on the Manning cast that they still have to learn how to finish. They still have to learn it's a 60-minute game. They're still not a championship team in that way. And that's certainly much more on the defensive side, but even the offense, like we talked about, that lateral play that you just look at that, it's just like, one, I don't really love the call in that spot, throwing a backwards pass, knowing that a backwards pass, if it hits the ground, it's a live football. If it's a forward pass, it hits the ground, no problem, no harm, no foul. So they still are chasing those elements, but 7 weeks into the season, if that's the worst you can say about a football team, you're doing a lot of things right, and you're winning a lot of football games. And this team went on the road against a team that fancied itself as a legitimate contender in the NFC. I think now with the injuries to Mike Evans and especially Chris Godwin being out for the year, that certainly throws as a fly in their ointment as it pertains to that. But I mean, you give the Ravens credit across the board, but still work to do on this defense. And yeah, I'm not really I'm nonplussed. I'm unfazed by the fact that Tampa ran the ball on them more than what we've seen until I see teams start doing that consistently. Still think it's a great run defense. So they at least have that going for them. And that's something that should help their pass defense as the year goes on in terms of teams are going to be behind a lot. Teams can't run the ball on you consistently. So you should have a good idea what they're trying to do against you, right? You should know, hey, they're probably going to throw it 40 plus times
But
against you
then you
because
got to
that's
defend it.
well,
And
but that's my point. Yeah, you got to go out and do it. So you might have the advantage of the opposition being a little more predictable than your typical matchup, but you still have to go out there and make plays, and they're still chasing that. I mean, they really are. So again, there were good things from their defense over the course of that game, but it's just not nearly complete enough at this point in time. And that's where you look at and you hear the comments from Kyle Hamilton or Roquan Smith on a weekly basis, and they're still chasing that. So there's that. And again, fingers crossed on Marlon Humphrey that, certainly that you're hoping that this isn't a lengthy absence. If he misses a game or two, that's not the end of the world. I mean, Arthur Millett's on the verge of coming back. Ardarius Washington again had another chance. Catch the football, man. I mean, he's there to make plays. You got to make them though. I mean,
he's
it's
doing
the
everything
NFL.
Geno Stone did last year, except catching the ball.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So again, you can look at elements of this defense and look at it as half full in certain ways, right? I mean, it's not.
Well, you can
It's
let
not
him throw the ball around 40 times. If you pick 3 or 4 of them, you win the game.
exactly.
Especially if you pick it in the end zone. Let them go 80 yards and pick it in the end zone. You frustrate the hell out of them, take points off the board, and cut their hearts out. But at some point, you gotta catch the ball, and you gotta make the sack, and you've got to get the punt team on the field or bring them to their knees on 4th down. And to your point, when they're behind in what you're going to be playing 4th downs, you're going to be playing to your knees. So all of that's going to be the case when you are winning by 2 or 3 touchdowns in the second. And they will be this week against Cleveland. They will be against Denver 2 weeks. They have another stretch where they have short rest against Cincinnati. They're going to see Pittsburgh, and then they're going to see the Chargers. So, the November part of the schedule after this next week or two, they're going to have a couple of serious division games and games where maybe they're in a little bit of peril. I felt like they were in peril losing 10-0 on Monday night. I felt like, well, at some point, 22-1 against the NFC and all of that goes
Yeah.
on. I felt like I said this to my wife, like literally, we're making food before we had some leftover Pizza John's. We made some pizza before the game on Monday because Pizza John's isn't open on Monday. So if you want Pizza John's on Monday Night Football, you got to go on Sunday. You know this. You're wearing the hat. But I said to her, I'm like, tonight's a weird game. It was like 7:30, and I said, I don't know that I'm in the mood to even watch football tonight. Like I watched it all day Saturday, all day Saturday. I'm like, yeah, this Monday night games, play these things on Sunday. It's driving me crazy. But I said to her, I'm like, they're in a little bit of peril tonight. This is a weird game. They have a real quarterback on the other side. There's some championship pedigree there. It's a road game. It's sleepy. And then they went out and they're losing early in the game. And I'm like, well, they answered that. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the best part of Monday night for me is watching everything not go right. And in the end, they're winning by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, the final score, I get it, ends up being a 10-point game. Even with the defense getting as sloppy as it got in the final quarter, I never felt like it was
It was a
truly in
2-quarter
peril.
game. The second and third quarter was the only time they really played football.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sure. And that's what was amazing about this game. I mean, over 500 yards of offense and 41 points, and go look at their first quarter. I mean, if not for the Charlie Kohler play, I mean, their yardage would have been nothing in that first quarter, just about.
Well,
So,
halftime was all about how Derrick Henry hadn't touched the ball, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, before Derrick Henry had his 81-yarder, he had 34 rushing yards. I mean, that was with what, 4 or 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. I mean, Derrick Henry, he was a factor in finishing the football game, but he wasn't a factor in how the Ravens built this lead. I mean, it was actually kind of amusing to hear the broadcast speculate about an injury for Derrick Henry. Well, they clearly didn't do their homework because Justice Hill's on the field when they go into 2 minute and they go into a little more up tempo and a little more pass heavy. I mean, because he's better in pass protection and he gives you more as a receiver out of the backfield. So, the game flow dictated a lot of that. I mean, you fell behind 10-0, right? Not that you're going to panic, but you're also not going to show a lack of urgency either. So, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, Tampa Bay was going to play a certain way. I mean, going into the game, I mentioned how they like to stack the box and they like to blitz and they play a lot of zone defense. And you do those things. I thought that was a recipe for Lamar Jackson to have another big night. He came up a little short on having his third straight 300-yard passing game, which would have been the first time he's ever done that. But hey, 5 touchdown passes. I mean, speaks for itself. And how about the fact that he did it again on Monday Night Football? And his career high in passing yardage, which was against Indy back in 2021, Monday Night Football. I mean, we'll talk about January legacy, Super Bowl, all that. We'll talk about that plenty between
Well, his
now
prime time record's
but
better than anybody in the history of the game, right?
yeah,
Right?
I mean
Percentage?
his Monday night, specifically Monday night. I mean, he's just put up some unbelievable games on Monday night. I mean, and look, at the end of the day, we get it. And Lamar be the first to tell you, he's thinking about Super Bowl. He's thinking about winning a championship. But this is an entertainment-driven business. At the end of the day, it's entertainment, right? I mean, inherently, a bunch of grown men playing a game is not valuable unless people are supremely entertained watching it. Lamar Jackson is supremely entertaining, and he was once again on Monday night. But going back to the defense, they don't have to do a whole lot. I mean, that's just the truth. They don't need this to be the 2000 Ravens. They don't need this to be the 2006 Ravens, or take your pick of any number of great defenses they've had over the last quarter century. They don't need that with this offense. But can you take the ball away a little more? Can you clean up the pass defense some? You don't have to be top 5 or even top 10. Just don't be 31st, right? Don't be at the very bottom. Can you move a little bit closer to the middle of the pack and get a few more takeaways in the process? You do that. Good luck trying to beat this team. I mean, you mentioned what their upcoming schedule. I mean, let's. I'm not saying this to even, to boast or anything like that. Is there another game left on the schedule where the Ravens aren't going to be favored? I mean, let's just, putting aside injuries, which can apply to any team, at any point, right?
Well,
But
Houston and the Chargers are the two games that you look at and say, they're troublesome, they're road game, whatever, but they'll be favored on the road. I mean,
that's
there's
my
no
point.
issue with the Ravens being
I
favored on the
mean,
road. Yeah.
I mean, maybe Houston, maybe. I mean, and again, a lot of that, how healthy is each team, all of that. But the rest of these games, I mean, the Ravens are going to be favored. Now, that doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, they were heavily favored against the Raiders, and it's amazing that game was a little over a month ago, and it becomes more and more perplexing every week. How in the world did they lose to the Raiders? I mean, it's just
Well, it was their
incredible
defense.
because their offense dropped the ball at the proverbial dropped the ball at a couple points in that game too. They could have put the ball away or put the game away with their offense in that game, and they didn't. Um, but it's inexplicable because it's not only that, at the time we thought, oh, the Raiders, maybe they're decent. Maybe they'll be a wild card contender. They're awful. I mean, they're one of the worst teams in football, and it's just incredible to think that the Ravens lost that game, 5 weeks later, because of how great the Ravens have been and how lousy the Raiders have been.
Well, we
But
were still talking about the offensive line then. We were still talking
sure,
about that gelling. We were
sure,
still
Max
talking.
Crosby
Yeah.
was great. Yeah, he was great in that game. Hey, and you know what? If you're John Harbaugh, you love the fact that you've won 5 games in a row, but you're going to continue to point back to that game for your team not to be overconfident. If you're John Harbaugh, you're going to play that clip from Ed Reed, of all people. John, they don't care what media guys say, right? They don't even care what former players in other markets or talking heads on ESPN say. John Harbaugh is going to play that clip of Ed Reed on the Manning cast saying, game's over in their minds. They don't understand the other side of finishing and being a championship team right now. And look, who am I to sit here and say Ed Reed's wrong or anything like that? I'm not. But that's the kind of ammunition that a coach loves having in the process of being 5-2, that you're not going to get overconfident. And of course, their defense, there's no reason for their defense to be overconfident right now, other
Well,
than
they've
the
lost
fact,
to Kansas City enough to know
sure,
like
sure,
none of
sure.
this matters. They can be 15-2, whatever the
They might
Chiefs are going
be.
to be. I mean, as I look at it now, thinking about the beginning of the year and the loss and where they are, the notion that they're going to have to go out to Kansas City, that would be the one thing that, much like when Flacco went to New England and won, because we were always on the road during that period of time. That's the one thing Lamar hasn't done, is going on the road and win playoff games. Like that would be the next thing. You think we can't beat them? We can beat them there. They're going to they're almost going to have to beat them there because of the early losses, because it doesn't feel like the Chiefs are going to stub their toe a whole lot here along the way either. And they've got a 2-game lead and the tiebreaker. So the Chiefs are going to have to lose 3 more games than the Ravens along the way. I don't know. And I know that you talk about playing the Raiders and the division that they're in. Uh, for me, the notion that they're going to have to go out to Kansas City and do it still looms kind of large. Way, way down the line, 3 months
Oh, sure.
from now, whatever, and
Well,
all the things that have to go right and wrong. But that's a shame part of it. But it's also yeah, we didn't beat them here, we'll beat them there. And I remember the Ravens' mindset about the Billy Cundiff game, and there were 365 days that, you covered the team at that point through that period of time where they had to own it. And every time I hear Joe Buck talk about, well, we sat with Lamar last night, all he talks about is losing that game, and and that 3 runs and they didn't win and they couldn't beat the Chiefs. And yeah, Lamar feels like the kind of guy that's going to be obsessed about that. And I don't I don't mind that, but the fact that they lost the first game does bring me a little bit of, they're going to have to go out there, and that's the part that worries me for the whole operation, is that it's not level playing field because of how they played the first 2 weeks.
well, look, the Ravens, their 2 Super Bowls, they were road warriors. I mean, you're not wrong, and that's why I said it to, when we had our first segment talking about this team, they have the best quarterback in football right now, with an asterisk, knowing that it's October and January and February is what matters. They have the best, and for my money, the best team in football right now, in terms of not record, because Kansas City has that, but in terms of how it looks across the board. Now, the defense isn't the best in the NFL. We know that, but the offense, overwhelmingly the best. So even if we don't want to say the best team, if you want to push back on that, fine. They have the best offense in the NFL right now, with an asterisk. I mean, it's all pending January. And to your point about Lamar and the way that he's talked, the way that he's playing right now, I mean, he's playing smart football. He's playing spectacular football. Uh, you know, didn't like the helmet to helmet hit he took. That, I mean, that was terrifying for a moment there. I mean, that was a brutal hit. And it's, again, a reminder that this can all be so fragile for anyone from Kansas City on down, right? If you lose your quarterback or you lose a critical player at another spot, it
Well, look at
can,
what happened to Tampa and Godwin at the end of the game,
yeah,
right? Look at
exactly. I
how
mean,
the air and the energy of the whole
yeah.
operation,
Well,
for
and
where they entered the game 4-2, feeling good about themselves, had a
yeah,
10-point lead at home. We lost to Lamar, but okay. And then
yeah,
playing around the last 45 seconds of the game, they really have cost themselves,
yeah.
a key player, a key
Uh,
player. Like,
it,
we
it,
wouldn't want to lose Derrick Henry like that.
sure, sure. It's unfortunate, but I mean, go back and look at the Ravens 3 years ago. They lost Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards within 5 minutes in a practice, right? It's a brutal sport. I mean, it really is. That's why you don't take any of this for granted. That's why, for anyone, for any Ravens fans that have tried, and there aren't many of them, but you'll find a certain segment of it on social media that will try to brush off what happened in 2019. Why? Because, well, they're ahead of schedule, and Lamar's only, at that point, he was what, 22 years old, 23 years old, whatever he was. And, even last year, it's like, well, their window's still wide open. And I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, none of this is guaranteed, right? I mean, we're going to talk about this Cleveland game in a very different light than we've talked about the last few weeks, right? because the Browns stink and they're a team that's going nowhere. Their central focus at this point is what the heck are they going to do at the quarterback position? How the heck are they going to finish out the season? What's that going to mean for Kevin Stefanski, even though he just got a contract extension? But if that team completely quits on him, is Jimmy Haslam going to see the course, or is he just going to blow everything up, including that quarterback contract that 2 more years still owed to Deshaun Watson? So it's going to be a very different tone in how we talk about that. But you and I both know that anything could happen out there on the field on Sunday. And I don't mean in terms of a win or a loss. Anything can happen that can be catastrophic to your team's Super Bowl aspirations on any given play. So,
well, if Joe Burrow's healthy and Lamar's not in week 12, they're a better team. Period. Right?
Or in January, if Lamar's not healthy, or Patrick Mahomes isn't healthy, or whatever team, Josh Allen. I mean, the same thing applies. So I don't say that you play scared. You can't do that either. And I'll hear the Godwin thing. At the same time, when do you take your foot off the gas, right? I mean, at some point, I mean, they could have quit at the beginning of the fourth quarter if they wanted to, I guess. But he could have got hurt at the end of the third quarter, right? I mean, so yeah, I hear the second guessing on that, and it's not you specifically. I saw lots of people on social media with that, but it's just it can happen on any given play, and that's where you have to have the proper amount of humility and urgency to recognize what you have and to seize the opportunity. That's why 2019 was so crushing. Go back to 2006, how crushing that was for the Ravens and what opportunity they had that year, right? I mean, they could have hosted the AFC Championship game that year the following week after the Patriots had beaten the Chargers. So when you have these teams that you can tell during the season that it's a special team, right? I mean, you could tell 2012, at this point, you couldn't tell if that was a special team. And that's kind of what made that story so special because of what happened in 2011 and the fact that they didn't really look like a championship caliber team really at any point during
Neither
the course
did the
of that.
Chiefs last year.
Sure, exactly. So what I mean by that is not that you're dismissive of anything or that you play scared but there is a certain amount of humility that you have to have knowing that on any given play that can all get wrecked, and why you have to seize the opportunity when it's presented to you. That's why it was so heartbreaking last January because the Ravens absolutely had the better team than the Chiefs over the course of the 2023 season. I don't think there's any way to dispute that. But they weren't better than them at the most important point in the season, in that AFC title game. And that's why the Chiefs had another trophy and why the Ravens were sitting at home watching them. So that same principle is still going to apply. And look, how many more games are the Ravens or the Chiefs going to lose? Are the Chiefs going to lose 3 more than the Ravens the rest of the way? I have no idea. I mean, who knows, right? It's certainly not a Kansas City team that's blowing people out on a weekly basis. So if you're going to sit here right now and look into the crystal ball and tell me that the Chiefs are going to have a stretch where they lose 4 out of 5 at some point, I probably would say, well, the way their offense is playing, that wouldn't completely stun me. Now their defense is playing at a high level. But again, it's all about when you get to that stage. And this Ravens team looks very well equipped offensively, but they still have some work to do with their defense. But again, it can all be so very fragile. And that's just a reminder that's in the back of your mind at any point to not get too high because you just don't know. And on the flip side, if you're Kansas City, who, by the way, and I've made reference to this even going back to the end of last year, the Chiefs have still not lost a football game, Nestor, since that Christmas Day debacle they had against the Raiders, where the Raiders had 2 pick sixes. And remember, the Ravens had their amazing performance in San Francisco that night. You think about where those two teams were at that point in time and the perception at that point in time, and then realize the Chiefs have not lost a football game. I'm not talking, preseason, whatever. They haven't lost a real football game since then. And it just speaks to, 1, how great they've been, and 2, how crazy this league is and how much things can flip. And we all remember Joe Flacco planking 12 years ago in mid-December of that Super Bowl year, and then what happened 5 weeks later in Denver. So, it's kind of a long-winded, roundabout way of reminding ourselves that still a little over a month ago until Thanksgiving, this team looks fantastic, especially on offense. I mean, this team right now, I'm not sure who's stopping them, right? The Ravens are the ones stopping the Ravens more than anything to this point in the season. But look, just because you're playing a certain way now doesn't mean that that's going to continue into November and December and January. And on the flip side, even if you do hit a bump in the road, and that's why I keep trying to point out the things about this defense that I still do like. I don't think they're devoid of talent, but they do need to put it together. They do need to be a more complete defense because, man, if you just get this, I got a message from one of my you know just Ravens fan friends that I follow on Twitter, Jamie. And he said, just imagine if Zach Orr can get this team to even just mediocre defensively, get this defense to play mediocre, average, middle of the road football. You're not gonna be able to beat them. And it's very tough to disagree with that at this point in time. It's going to take a Herculean effort to beat this Ravens team with the way that it's playing offense at this point, not in week 1 and week 2, what they're playing now. And if you can put a little more productivity out of your defense, force a couple more turnovers, get a couple more stops, play, even if it's not 60 minutes, can you play 50 minutes of good football more consistently as a defense? You do those things, good luck. I mean, really, it truly is good luck trying to beat this team, unless they beat themselves and they turn the ball over and they commit penalties and they do silly things and they make bad play calls and all of that. So, I mean, it's a pretty good space to be in when 5 weeks ago we were talking about this team being 0-2. And even if I was far from thinking they were on the brink or panicking or anything like that, certainly when you're 0-2, you're not feeling great about things. And 5 weeks later, they're on top of the world in terms of how they're feeling right now, even if no, they don't have the best record in the NFL like Kansas City has right now.
He is Baltimore Luke. He's Luke Jones. You can find his work out on social media. We're trying to make heads or tails of Cleveland week. It is a short week here. We're talking World Series. Luke and I had a long chat about the Orioles offseason. Yes, there is such a thing. There's a real offseason for the Orioles this year, so we're going to be monitoring that probably a lot more closely than we have, given new ownership and what we hope is a new philosophy in some way here for the offseason for the Orioles. In the meantime, the Ravens have kept things very, very interesting in the week before Halloween. All of our work is up at BaltimorePositive.com. Our Maryland Crab Cake Tour is back after it on Friday. We're going to be at Mama's on the Half Shell in Owings Mills. The kids call it Foundry Row. It's like Baltimore Peninsula. It'll always be Port Covington to me. It'll always be Painter's Mill to me out there in Owings Mills. We'll be there on Friday from 1 to 4. We'll have Raven scratch-offs to give away from the Maryland Lottery. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare putting Luke out on the road, as well as our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Had some Rofo chicken over the weekend. I don't put pictures up on social media every time I get a two-piece with Western fries. Sometimes I put the Western fries up just to piss off Max Weiss because she doesn't like Western fries because she doesn't know what's good. Got to get the right ketchup with those as well. But also our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, as well as Curio Wellness, putting us out on the road for the Maryland Oyster Tour. It's our 26th anniversary, 26 years of doing this, 26 oysters in 26 days in 26 ways. We're up to about day 7 or 8. Ray Bachman is going to be honored this week. He is battling cancer right now down in Anne Arundel County. There's a GoFundMe page set up if you were a fan of Ray, his trivia nights. If you love Ray, Ray is easy to find out on social media. It's very easy to find the GoFundMe page to help him and his family. He and I have been texting. He has a throat issue where he can't speak, but he can text, and he's giving me good text. So Ray's hanging in there. Ray's battling the battle. People are asking me about Ray. I want to make sure that we are keeping people up to date on what's going on there. Meantime, we're having oysters. I had some oysters with Ray down at Mike's in Riva, Maryland a couple of weeks ago. The Oyster Tour brought to you by Curio Wellness and Foreign Daughter and Liberty Pure Solutions. They keep my well water clean. They can keep your well water clean, as well as take care of all of your plumbing needs. 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. Luke and I are going to continue on with NFL conversation, World Series, Dodgers and Yankees. It's crazy. Luke's been on the planet like 41, 42 years, has never seen the Yankees and the Dodgers in the World Series. And it feels like they play every year, but they don't. And they haven't since 1981. So I'll be watching Chavez Ravine and the Bronx all weekend long because I like baseball. So does Luke. So do you. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking the magic of Lamar Jackson and Baltimore Positive.